We're really familiar with how albizia is a very dangerous tree to be around, be under. For those who were living here in Puna through Isel, like all of us, there was a great deal of damage that happened to a lot of houses, cars, water tanks, and luckily we didn't lose any lives. It was a dangerous time in Puna after that tropical storm because we lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees coming down. So we've been working at BIISC to try and mitigate this hazard and make Puna just a little bit safer for folks. And what we have here today for you is a presentation by our Forest Response Coordinator, Dustin Swan. And if we're on Facebook now, welcome to those who are joining on Facebook. I just want to put out a little mention that Kavehi Lopez, say hi Kavehi to our Facebook people.
Aloha.
Is going to be handling the question and answers on the Facebook side. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, you can go ahead and put those over there. And on this side, if you have any questions or comments for Dustin, you can go ahead and use the chat or the question and answer. And Jade Amalia will be handling that on this side. So now that we've got the housekeeping taken care of, I want to go ahead and introduce Dustin. He is our Forest Response Coordinator at BIISC. He came to us several years ago after he worked in California and in Washington State in natural resources and wildland fire management for the U.S. Forest Service. So he's been with BIISC for over 6 years and started on our albizia control team. And I believe even before that, Dustin, you were an albizia control volunteer. Yeah, that's how you first came into contact. That's right. So ended up doing such a great job as a volunteer and really motivated to kill albizia. So he joined our albizia control team. And then later, when we discovered rapid ohia death, a fungal pathogen that's killing ohia trees on our island, he transitioned into an early detection role for that team as well. And at the end of 2020, he began coordinating the response for us as the head of the BIISC Forest Response team. So time doing albizia, time doing rapid ohia death, and unfortunately probably some other things because our forest is constantly under threat. So I'm going to turn it over to Dustin now to share his screen. And if you want to just say hi to folks, Dustin, and anything I missed in your bio, you're welcome to share.
No, thanks, Franny. I appreciate it. Yeah, aloha, everyone. So my name is Dustin, as Franny said. I want to give a big shout out to Franny and her outreach team for putting on these webinars. We really appreciate all the work that they do to engage the local communities in invasive species awareness. So today we're here to talk about albizia. As Franny said, it's something that I have been familiar with for quite some time now. And so it's kind of near and dear to me. We're going to go over a little bit about the history of albizia, how it got here, explore why it's a problem here on Hawaii Island, well, really across the state, learn how to safely and effectively treat albizia, and we're going to cover how to deal with albizia on your own lot and also on neighboring lots. And then after that, I'll go through some kind of recent projects that BIISC has worked on with albizia. So a little bit about the history. Albizia, or Falcatarium malucana, is native to the Molucca Islands and Indonesia. So it was introduced in the early 20th century, a little over 100 years ago, and planted because it's extremely quick growing. And so it was an attractive reforestation tree for the slopes that were left bare through deforestation and cattle ranching. It was one of the most commonly planted trees in the forest reserves of Hawaii in the early 20th century. And about 140,000 trees were planted statewide. So if you think about that, just taking a drive through Lower Puna without even leaving the highway, I mean, you see hundreds of thousands of albizia trees. So, you know, we can already start to see that that's a problem. There's a lot more trees now than were planted at the turn of the last century. So a lot of these trees were planted in Hilo and Puna during the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And then in the 80s and 90s, with the collapse of the sugarcane industry, this led to widespread open areas that were easily invaded by albizia trees. And you'll see that badge there. It holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest growing tree in the world. That was clocked here in Hawaii. And it can grow up to an inch per day, 10 to 15 feet in a year, and they get up to 200 feet tall. So super fast growing and grow exceptionally tall. After 4 years, they start producing tens of thousands of seeds that get caught in the wind, blow around, and easily disperse. So, why is albizia such a big problem? As I mentioned, it grows really fast, and so it doesn't spend any time building up structure as it grows. It has these extremely heavy and brittle branches and a really shallow root system. So with winds, strong winds and storms, the branches break off, the whole tree can topple over and have a catastrophic failure. With these big heavy branches, it can cause damage to important infrastructure. This is especially true when they fall on power lines, roads, homes, things like that. Franny mentioned it, in August 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle slammed into Lower Puna. It blocked emergency access routes. Residents were left stranded in their neighborhoods. There were about 30,000 people that were left without power. And some of those outages actually lasted for several weeks. Millions and millions of dollars of damage caused almost entirely due to falling albizia trees. Helco actually estimated that about $13 million was spent just cleaning up after Iselle. And Hawaii Department of Transportation estimates about 90% of the calls they get for power outages are from trees falling on the power lines, from albizia trees. So even without wind, albizia can still be a major problem. In this slide, there's a picture of a tree that's about 3 foot in diameter. This fell down on some power lines. This is in Wainaku. These lines are servicing the Hamakua coast. This tree came down during a typical Hawaii day, normal trade winds, nothing exceptional about weather. And it came down over this bridge and over these power lines. It took Helco working through the night and well into the next day to restore service for the parts of Hamakua that those lines were servicing. So albizia is also a nitrogen fixing legume. And so that means that it's capable of taking plant unavailable nitrogen from the air and converting it into nitrogen that can be used by plants, plant available nitrogen. As the leaves fall and branches break off, they land in the soil beneath the tree, start to decompose, and that raises the nitrogen level. So that starts enriching that soil and raising the nitrogen level. Invasive plants are able to readily use that nitrogen. So things like the strawberry guava and the clidamia on the left in this slide here, those can readily take in that nitrogen. They grow exceptionally fast and start outcompeting things like our native kolea and the ohia here. Unfortunately, the native plants were evolved and not adapted to utilize that nitrogen. So they grow much slower and they're not able to utilize all those nutrients that these trees are injecting into the soil. And so they're easily outcompeted in their native environments by these invasive weeds. So as I've mentioned, albizia grows exceptionally fast and it easily invades new areas. So here in this photo, in the upper left, here's a single tree out in a fallow cane field up the Hamakua coast somewhere. And just 2 years later, as you look in the lower left corner here, you can see that that tree has started producing seeds that are spreading out. There's a whole sea of keiki coming in underneath there, young albizia. And then in about 9 years later, after that single tree was there, we have a whole forest of albizia. These trees are going to mature, they're going to start spreading seeds, and this is just going to continue that cycle of seeding and spreading until this whole field is full of albizia. And this is just another example of how quickly it spreads. The aerial photo on the left here is taken around Rainbow Falls in the Wailuku River. In 1993, it was estimated there was about 10 acres of albizia forest around that area. And just 16 years later, this satellite image was taken in 2009. The estimate is 35 acres. So in 16 years, this has increased over 250% in albizia invaded land around, and this is right around Hilo. So another issue that people may not always think about is these trees are massive and they grow very quickly. And so they can easily start to obstruct our views and our skylines. This picture was taken from boiling pots in the 1980s. You can see there's, beautiful waterfall, probably ohia forest in the background. And then you've got a nice view of Mauna Kea in all her glory. But you'll see on the left there, circled in red, there's one large albizia tree poking its head out. So just about 30 years later, this was the view, that same view, taken from boiling pots, looking towards Mauna Kea. You can see it's been completely obscured. These trees are probably, well over 100 feet tall, and it's just a complete forest of albizia. Imagine all the folks that live in the neighborhoods in Lower Puna. If we didn't have albizia obscuring our views from our lots, a lot more lots would have ocean views and or mountain views. So just one of the other problems with these trees. All right, so we're here today to learn more about albizia and how to treat it, safely treat it. But it's really important to discuss the difference between a hazardous and a non-hazardous albizia tree. A hazardous albizia tree is going to be a tree that requires some sort of professional intervention to mitigate that hazard before it's treated. We're here today to learn about treating non-hazardous trees because it's dangerous and irresponsible to treat a hazardous tree. So how do we define a hazardous tree? When determining this, we have to ask some of the following questions. If a branch breaks off or the tree falls over, could it be a risk, to things such as power lines, buildings, such as a house or a shed? Could it fall down and hit the roadways or someone's driveway? If it comes down, is it going to crush someone's catchment tank or a fence? Also, is part of that tree hanging over your yard or maybe your neighbor's yard, an area that you spend time, mowing or gardening? We don't want to treat these trees in any areas where people could be present, because as you'll learn, they come down much more readily and easily. So if the answer is yes to any of these, it's a hazardous tree. And that hazard must be dealt with before we treat it with herbicide. This is very important. So on the flip side, non-hazardous trees don't pose a safety risk. And again, we're here just to learn about treating non-hazardous trees. So a couple things to keep in mind. When treated with herbicide, a large albizia tree, they can stay standing for the next 5 or more years. They're quickly going to defoliate over the next year or two. Those fine branches are going to come down, and then the larger main branches will start to fall down over the next 5 years. So if you're considering developing or bulldozing a lot to build on, anytime within the next 5 years, you may consider holding off on doing that. And it's really, this is kind of important because once you treat those trees and they're standing, arborists and bulldoze operators are not going to want to go into that lot with those big dead trees. So you may have trouble getting someone to clear that lot for you if you go ahead and treat those trees now. It would actually be easier and safer to have them taken down while they're still alive. And then one other thing that I wanted to mention, in the little graphic here on the bottom of the screen, you can see this taller tree. It's kind of next to these power lines. This tree would be hazardous, you know, because it's so close to these power lines, obviously. The tree behind it wouldn't necessarily be hazardous. It's a smaller tree. It's well away from those power lines. But something to keep in mind that especially in larger albizia trees, as they get older, they can start to graft their roots under the soil. And so that allows them to start sharing resources between these two trees. And so if you were to treat that smaller tree behind the bigger tree, it could actually translocate that herbicide into the larger tree. And then all of a sudden that's a major risk to those power lines and roadways. So just something to keep in mind that this is a possibility. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the treatment method. The method that we use, it's called incision point application, and we use an herbicide called Milestone Specialty herbicide. And you'll often hear this referred to as a hack and squirt method, and you'll see why here in a few minutes. A little bit about Milestone. It's an aminopyrrolid. It's classified as a reduced risk pesticide by the EPA. It's rated at the lowest category of risk, which is a category 4. And it's essentially a highly specialized salt. It contains no hexachlorobenzenes, which is a carcinogen that's found in some other pesticides. It's a plant growth regulator. And so what that means is it disrupts the metabolism of the tree. So when the tree can't metabolize water and nutrients and produce energy, it dies. Once that tree is injected with the herbicide, this process just takes a few hours to start going into effect. So that tree will be dead within, a matter of days, maybe a couple of weeks, depending on the size. There have been studies that have shown that there's no ill effects on mammals and birds. So it's safe to use around pets like dogs and cats. It's safe to use around your chickens. It's not toxic to worms. It's not toxic to bees, fish, or aquatic invertebrates. But just one quick note, although there's no serious health or environmental risks that have been identified with Milestone, it can cause crops to fail because it is a plant growth regulator. So as we talked about earlier, albizia is full of nitrogen, so it makes a great mulch in your garden. But if you're going to use that tree as mulch, go ahead and cut it down, mulch it up, spread it in your garden, and then treat the stump. You don't want to treat the tree and then mulch with it in your garden because it could cause your vegetables to, it could kill your vegetable plants. It is full of nitrogen though, and it makes a great, mulch for your garden and yard. So a little bit about the hack and squirt. You can see in the picture here in the upper left-hand corner, we take a hatchet and we'll hack it into the tree just through the bark. So you can see the bark around the white area here, the little red colored tissue right under the bark, and then we're into this white glossy layer. So that's the sapwood of the tree. So that's the layer of the tree that's going to be moving those nutrients and water up and down the main stem. And so that's where we want to get that herbicide so that the tree can take it into the rest of the system. It usually takes 1 or 2 hacks to open up the bark and create this little pocket here to put the Milestone. And it takes a small amount, we'll talk about that in a minute, very small amount of herbicide to kill, an entire stand of albizia trees, like you can see down here in the lower left. So here's just a quick video of the hack and squirt method. In this video, Bill's making an incision through the bark into that white layer, into the sapwood, and then applying a 0.5 milliliter of the milestone herbicide per hack. So that's just 1/60th of an ounce of herbicide. In a tree this size, you might do 1 hack, maybe 2. And so the number of hacks that you make is going to be based on the size of that tree. Trees that are less than 2 feet in diameter, you're going to make your hack mark about every 10 inches. And so we like to tell people about a shaka width, around the stem of that tree. So, a hack at the thumb and a hack at the pinky. As the trees get bigger, your hack marks are going to get a little bit closer together. So 2 to 3 feet in diameter, you're gonna make that about a 1/2 shaka width, so about 5 inches. And then trees, those big monster trees that are over 3 feet, you're gonna make those hacks about every 2 inches. So almost a hack mark, right next to each other around the stem of that tree. And then again, in each of those hacks, you're only injecting 0.5 milliliter of the milestone herbicide. So on a tree, if you had a tree this size, say it takes two injections to kill this tree, we could kill 30 trees this size with 1 ounce of milestone herbicide. It's highly effective. Small amount goes a long way when treating albizia. And again, we're only treating trees that are not hazardous. So the best time to kill an albizia tree is when it's small, obviously, before it becomes a problem. If the tree is small enough, you can just go and yank that thing right out of the ground. As they start to get a little bit bigger, even in loose rocky soil, it can get kind of tough to pull them out of the ground. So you can, as you saw here, you can just snap off the top. You just put a little drop of milestone in the top of that stem. You don't have to use a whole 0.5 milliliter. Just a drop of milestone, and that thing will die. If you do pull the tree out of the ground, be sure to set it up on something up off the ground. Otherwise, it could resprout. All right, and so in this is a fun little time lapse here. Here, Bill's running around. Well, he's actually walking around, and he treats about a dozen trees in this time lapse. You can see the trees up front there. They maybe took 2, maybe 3 hacks to treat those ones, and then the larger trees in the back, they probably took 4 or 5 hacks. This is a really fast time lapse. He probably treated a dozen trees right here, and it maybe took him, 10 minutes to do that work. It's really, really easy, really safe, and really effective. I guess before I move into the next section, I could check and see if there's any questions about milestone.
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, perfect.
I don't think so. I think we're good.
All right.
Wait,
one second, yeah.
Oh, they were asking about the autograph tree. They're saying rubber tree, but I think they mean that big autograph tree that's there. The answer for that is no. I mean, it can be, but it's not very effective. Very few things are effective on autograph tree, but we could talk about that later. And then we have another question just asking, where can I get milestone?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. You used to be able to find it at Garden Supply downtown in Hilo, but I'm not sure if they carry it anymore. And I'm sorry, Franny, maybe you can. I
believe Nutrient Ag.
Nutrient Ag. It used to be called something else.
Yeah, that used to be CPS, but Nutrient Ag, Hilo, and on the Kona side, I'm pretty sure Farm and Garden has it. We have a buyer's guide. If Jade or Molly wants to kind of find that buyer's guide and put it in the chat that has different herbicides. Did we include milestone? We included milestone on that, yes?
Milestone is included. I'm looking for it now. And I'll put it in the chat.
In the chat.
Thank you, Molly. All right. So, you know, we've looked at using Milestone and how easy it is to use to treat non-hazard trees. So you can take that, go out and treat the non-hazardous trees on your property, or you know, help your neighbors out if they need a hand. But what if the trees on your property are hazardous, right? These trees don't stay small for very long. They quickly grow very large and become a danger pretty easily. So the best way to deal with them is to work with an arborist to trim or fell the hazardous parts of that tree. As you may or may not know, arborists are expensive. So there's a couple of things that you can do to help kind of reduce the costs. If you have to reach out and hire an arborist to do this work, you want to make it as cost effective for yourself as possible. So one of the things to do is ask them to just leave the debris on site. You know, once they trim back the tree or they cut it down, just leave it on the property. As we've talked about, albizia is full of nitrogen. It's going to break down and increase the nitrogen in your soil, and you know, it makes great fertilizer for your fruit trees. So it'll be a great place to plant some citrus, or I grow ulu and a jackfruit that does really well in my yard, where there was an albizia tree at one time. And if you ask the arborist to remove the debris, that can quickly increase the cost of the project. It could potentially even double the cost of the project. So if you're able to, just have them leave the debris on site. You want to make sure that if the tree's cut down, that you treat the stumps, or you have the arborist treat the stumps. So make sure that that's part of the contract. If you don't treat an albizia that's been trimmed or cut, it will resprout. You know, 100% of the time, those trees will resprout. And then within a matter of years, you're going to be hiring an arborist again to come out and cut it and deal with the resprouted hazards on that tree. But another way to significantly reduce the cost is to only cut back only have them cut back the hazardous portions of the tree. And so you can kind of see that here. This is a project we did along Maku'u Drive a couple of years ago. And we contracted with the arborist to trim back these hazard portions that were overhanging Maku'u Drive here. In the back, you can see the trees that were left are leaning away from the street or the roadway there into an empty lot. So these are not, you know, these are really tall trees, but they're not hazardous because they're tipping back the other way. And then once the arborist came in and did that work, our team actually went in and treated all these trees. So we went in and treated those so those things won't resprout. Make sure you ask the arborist to treat them, or be willing to go out and treat them yourselves. We have a list of certified arborists on our website. I have the website in a couple places later in these slides, but it's BIISC.org/albizia. All right, so what if the tree is on your neighbor's property? Well, if it's not hazardous, the easiest thing to do is reach out to your neighbor. Usually if you contact your neighbor and say, hey, I want to go treat your non-hazardous albizia trees for free at no cost, you know, most of the time they're going to say, yeah, go for it. I appreciate the help. But if the tree is hazardous, then there's some steps that you need to follow. So obviously you need to contact the neighbor. The easiest way is if they live on the property and you have some kind of a relationship with them, you know, maybe you see them coming to the property occasionally, and just have a conversation with them in person. Maybe they haven't looked at that part, that side of their property to see that they have this big tree hanging over your catchment tank or whatever. And they might be willing to just have that taken care of. If not, then you're going to want to send them a letter. We have templates on our website in both English and Japanese that talk about, what albizia is. A lot of these absent landowners don't even know what an albizia tree is. May have never even visited their property. So it explains a little bit about what albizia trees are, that there's a hazard on the property and that you're asking them to deal with it or mitigate that hazard. You want to, so you can get the information to send those letters on the Hawaii County TMK website. We have links to that on our, on the BIISC page. And on that website, you can get the mailing address and the owner's name for the property. You want to make sure to include photos that clearly show the hazard. So that means that if there's a tree hanging over your catchment tank or your house, you want to make sure to get in frame, the tree and the infrastructure that is being threatened by that tree in the same frame. You want to show that this is the major hazard. And then make copies of everything that you send. Document it because you may need it later or down the road. So this is the first step, and there is some success with this, right? If you reach out to the landowner and say, you have this hazardous albizia that's threatening my house, they may contact an arborist and have that dealt with. You don't know until you try. But if you don't get a response or you get a negative response from that landowner, the next step would be to contact the county. And so Section 20, Article 2 of the Hawaii County Code addresses unsafe flora, including albizia. This whole process is outlined on our website. That's a great resource. So all the information you need is at BIISC.org/albizia. The county has a website, so it's a web form that you go on and you fill out. And you want to be sure to select unsafe flora pose and imminent danger. So it's a drop down in a list, and you want to make sure to select that one, because what that is going to do is the county will then send out a letter to that landowner saying, hey, your neighbor has reported a hazardous albizia tree. If we have to go and deal with that, we could put a lien on your property. So the landowner has now gotten a letter from you, and now they're getting a letter from the county saying, we may put a lien on your property if we have to deal with this tree. And so this could increase that success rate of having your neighbor deal with that tree. If they want to go to sell down the road, the last thing they want is a lien on that property. So they are more inclined to have that hazard tree dealt with. And then you can either wait for the county to respond or the neighbor, or you could simultaneously contact the state HIEMA office. That's the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. So Act 76 allows the state or a state representative to enter a property to mitigate hazards, and that includes unsafe flora like albizia. If you contact the state, you need to contact the homeowner for a second time. So you want to document that second certified letter and packet that you send to the homeowner. And then with this one, you also need to get a hazard tree assessment from a qualified arborist to include in the packet that you send to the state HIEMA office. And again, we have the information for who to contact and where to send that in Honolulu on our website. Yeah, and just some quick considerations. Make sure to keep records of all communications. I mentioned that before. It's important to document all this. If nothing else, if the landowner still doesn't act on that hazard tree, and goodness forbid it comes down in a storm and crushes your catchment tank, you have it documented now that that landowner has been notified that they have that this hazard existed and they did not mitigate it or deal with that hazard. So you could have some recourse there to get them to buy you a new catchment tank. Yeah, as I mentioned, the photo clearly needs to show the hazard. And again, as you move through this process, your chances of success do improve. Yeah, and dealing with the county or the state or absent landowners, this whole process is going to take time. So the best time to start it is today. And again, all this information and all the details of these processes are outlined on our website. And then one other thing, SB 464 became law in April 2019. And so this authorizes a property owner or their agent to enter an adjacent property with albizia under certain conditions to control those trees. And this is before they become hazardous. There's a couple of things that you have to do before you can enter your neighbor's property and treat those trees. You still have to consult with a certified arborist and get that tree risk assessment. And you need to make at least 2 attempts, documented attempts through registered mail to contact that landowner before entering the property. Once you have all that in hand though, then you can legally enter your neighbor's property and treat their non-hazardous trees. Again, I'm stressing this. You cannot go onto your neighbor's property and treat a hazardous tree with this. If you treat a hazardous tree, then you could be held responsible for any damage that occurs from that tree coming down and causing damage. So non-hazardous trees only. I think actually, Franny, I'm just gonna see if there's any more questions about this process really quick before I move to the next part.
Yeah, I think it is a complicated process. So folks, if they have any questions, go ahead, put them in the chat or on Facebook. We did have a couple of questions and I think you covered it, but somebody is, Dane actually is saying, are you not to go next door and poison every albizia, only to find out that the people on the other side have already girdled the trees? So, wow, it's, I think Dane's making the point that communication is probably pretty important, right?
Yeah. And that's a really good point. So that's actually a good thing just to quickly touch on. There are multiple ways to kill an albizia tree, and there is limited success with girdling, although it's not very effective. So even though those trees have been girdled, it's pretty likely that they'll resprout below the girdle. It might kill the top of the tree, but there's a good chance that they're going to resprout below that girdle. So even if they've been girdled, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and treat that tree with milestone.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you, Dustin.
Sorry, I have a question about that. If the tree is already girdled, would you hack below the girdling or above?
Below.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's going to be where the live tissue is to take the herbicide, right?
And you covered the information about neighboring properties. So I think that's really important. Is there anything on Facebook, Kavehi, that people have questions?
I don't see anything coming in, but I did see an earlier question in the Zoom chat about someone had asked if girdling is useless.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just touched on that. It's not entirely useless, but I would say 9 times out of 10, trees that we've seen out in the forest that have been girdled are resprouting from below from the base of the tree. So it's, yeah, it's just using the milestone herbicide. It is 100% effective if done correctly. Then it is 100% effective at killing that tree safely, as long as it's done safely and properly, right?
And I think there's also a point you made, I have friends who have successfully girdled, and for them, there were trees that were nearby that they were able to go back and any part that was still growing, they were able to kind of, because you have to really girdle about a 2 to 3 foot section, right? It's not a small frill, right? You got to really get that bark off for an entire section. And so people who are able to revisit the same tree and go at it again and go at it again, have success. Whereas a lot of the work we do, doing a couple hundred or a few thousand trees in an area,
exactly,
not going to have time to go back and revisit. So if you feel more comfortable girdling and you have that time and ability to revisit that tree, you're going to have a lot more success than if you just kind of want to get it done and get it out of mind and out of your way.
That's a great point. Thank you so much, Franny. Yeah.
There are a few more questions.
Okay.
Okay. What are the differences between this advice and advice for rainbow eucalyptus? Like, will milestone hack and squirt possibly work on rainbow eucalyptus?
So I don't know the answer to that. I've never tried. My guess is probably not. Milestone does tend to work on softer tissue trees like Malochia, Cecropia, African tulip, and gunpowder, trees like that. It's been pretty successful on. I think the trees that are a harder wood, like eucalyptus, I don't think milestone would be very effective on, but I don't know the answer to that. So I guess give it a shot.
Does across the street count as adjacent? I would say yes, but what do you think?
Boy, legally, I don't know, but technically, in a neighborhood, your neighbor across the street or that lot across the street, those trees could easily get big enough to impact your property. So I would say yes. I mean, I would guess yes, that's an adjacent property, right?
And you would think if it's in a neighborhood, maybe the community association would be frustrated because it's, invading on their roads. Or do you think the county would, if it's a county road, they would, I guess, yeah, just want to get it.
I don't know that the county would take care of it just because it's threatening a county road. And in the neighborhoods, especially in Puna, most of the roads inside the neighborhoods are private roads, right? I know Little Boulevard is a county road, but all the roads in between the boulevard and the drive itself, it's all private. So yeah. Were there any other questions, Molly?
I don't see any more.
Okay. So I just want to briefly go over some of the, this is just a handful of the projects that BIISC has been involved with over the past several years. We've done quite a bit of work partnering with different agencies and coordinating with different entities to mitigate hazardous albizia along priority roadways. This includes, emergency egress routes of highways and roadways within neighborhoods. So here, this is one project. In 2018, in HPP, we received some funding through grant and aid, and we're able to complete a project along Maku'u Drive between the highway and Railroad Ave. And Railroad Avenue is also an emergency egress route for some of the other neighborhoods in Lower Puna. And so the idea is to kind of create a safe corridor up to the highway from Railroad Ave along Maku'u. So our team went in, we surveyed for albizia on properties along Makuu down to Railroad Ave. We reached out to the landowners that had albizia on their properties. And then we contracted and worked with an arborist to mitigate the hazard trees. You know, there was a photo of that earlier in the slide presentation. Once they had trimmed back all those trees and felled any of the trees that they were taking all the way down, then our team went in and treated all of the smaller non-hazard trees and stumps. So just some stats on that. There were 54 properties that had hazard trees on them. The arborists were able to mitigate 406 hazardous trees. The arborist work cost about $145,000. So that's actually pretty good for 406 trees, right? Arborist work is very expensive. We were able to treat along approximately 2 miles of roadway, and there were 80 properties in total. And once our albizia assassin team had gone in and finished treating, they had done over 7,800 albizia treatments. Another project that we worked on in 2017 was a partnership with the Hawaii Department of Transportation and the County Public Works. And this was to clear back the tree tunnel that was along the saddle up near the new extension. Again, the hazardous trees were limbed or felled, and then our crew went in on the ground to treat the remaining trees and stumps. In this project, we were able to treat just over 6 miles of roadway, and more than 20,000 trees were treated. Just a, kind of a side note, since this project was finished, we have had to go back in and do some smaller scale treatments to try to keep the roadway safe from resprouting trees. But it's important to note that BIISC doesn't receive specific funding to maintain these previously treated sites. It's pretty much impossible for us to dedicate the necessary resources for keeping these corridors safe in the long term. And so that's why it's so important for landowners and other responsible entities to stay on top of the albizia as it resprouts in these areas where treatments have been done. Because it'll quickly, as we've already learned, it's going to quickly become a forest of hazardous albizia that's expensive and resource intensive to remove again in the future. So one of the more recent projects that we've been working on, in 2020, we received another grant in aid to start work in Hawaiian beaches. This is along Kaaka'i Boulevard. We got started with the survey work in early 2020, and then of course the pandemic hit and things kind of ground to a halt for a while. But then by the end of 2020, we were able to finish up this surveying. We contacted 120 lot owners. Those are the owners in phases 1 and 2 on this map. So those are all the lots, those are the phases on the Makai side of Kaaka'i, so the ocean side down towards the bottom. Again, we contracted with an arborist to trim and fell the hazardous portions of the trees. But in this instance, we were only able to take care of 59 hazardous trees. And that project cost $200,000. So, as I mentioned before, on Makuu, we were able to take care of over 400 trees for $145,000. But on this project, it would cost more money and less trees. And there's a couple of factors that play into this. So the trees along Makuu were not quite as old, a little bit smaller. And almost all the trees that were cut back along Kaaka'i were massive trees. I mean, some of these were 7 to 8 feet in diameter. They were huge. The lots are a lot smaller, so it took a lot more, it was more complicated for the arborist to get those trees down. They were really close to power lines. They were really close to a lot of infrastructure like homes and roadways. So it just, the project, ended up just costing quite a bit more to have the arborist work done. Unfortunately, we were only able to mitigate hazards about halfway through phase 2. So we took care of phase 1 and about half of phase 2 with the arborist work. Once that work was done, our team again went in. We treated over 3,000 non-hazard trees on all of the remaining lots in phases 1 and 2. So we were hoping this year, we applied again for grant and aid. We were hoping to finish out phase 2 with the hazardous work and then start working on phase 3. But unfortunately, I just learned earlier this week that we were not awarded the grant this year. So unfortunately, this project is on hold for the time being until we can secure the funding to continue that project. We're all pretty bummed about that. Let's see. So another thing that we really enjoy doing, obviously, things like this, community engagement, right? Since 2014, we have had over 600 community members attend our webinars during COVID, but most of these were various hands-on workshops where members of the public came out to learn all about albizia, to learn how to safely treat the non-hazard albizia. And through those efforts, to date, our community has treated over 14,000 albizia trees all across mostly the east side of Hawaii Island. And if you look at all the various photos here, everyone's got a big smile on their face because it's tons of fun to kill albizia. We also have some of the neighborhoods, especially here in Puna, that have kind of formed their own albizia assassin teams. And so the neighborhood I live in Ainaloa, we had a group of retirees that formed a nonprofit called Albizia Be Gone. They went through and surveyed the entire neighborhood and contacted owners that had albizia on their lots. And then they sent out letters to each of the lots and got permission back to treat more than 300 of those lots. Our team went out and helped with that, helped treat those trees. And as Franny mentioned, this is the group I was volunteering with before I started my time with BIISC. They're a lot of fun. But so this was neat because even though they reached out to the landowners and said, hey, we want to go treat these trees for free, a lot of the folks that they contacted when they returned those permission slips, they included like cash and checks and money and said, thank you so much for doing this work. And so Judy formed a nonprofit and they were able to use those funds to buy equipment, like their hard hats and hatchets. And they even have magnets that they stick on the side of the car that says, albizia treatment in progress, so that the community knows what's going on when they hop out of the car looking like Bob does here in this photo. Another big project that we worked on for a couple of years was down in Seaview Estates. Ushi and a couple of other community members organized some monthly work days. BIISC would come down, help treat lots of trees down in that neighborhood. They were able to get permission to treat over 134 properties. And well, I should say the community killed thousands of trees with BIISC down there. And then a couple of other communities that we're currently working with, HPP, they do monthly workshops down at their community center. So it's not always albizia. Oftentimes BIISC will go down and talk about little fire ants, rat lungworm. I think they have a master gardeners program now. And then, occasionally or every few months, we'll do an albizia workshop down in HPP. In Leilani Estates, Mark has started getting his group back together. So their community association supports his efforts They provide the herbicide and equipment he needs to take community members out into the neighborhood. And they treat non-hazard trees in the easements, and he gets permission from lot owners down in Leilani. And then recently we started working in North Hilo with the Kamae community. And so we've been out there a couple months now, and they've treated, thousands and thousands of trees already. It's great. So with that, if you're interested in forming an albizia assassin team in your own neighborhood, then please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Each community has their own unique approach, and we're glad to sit down and discuss what might best work for you and your community. We're glad to share, what's worked and what hasn't worked for other folks. So if you're interested, let us know, and we'll do our best to support those efforts. So that kind of concludes my talk about albizia. And in summary, it's tons and tons of fun to kill albizia, as you can tell by all the smiles on these folks' face here. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to me talk about albizia for the last 45 minutes.
I'm glad so many people are interested in hearing you talk about albizia for 45 minutes. I also want to thank Ho'uli Lahui, which is a nonprofit in Puna that helped us spread the word and put this on, run by Susie Osborne. And it kind of dovetails with the question that just came in. Someone asked if there was a community team in Nanavali, and there is not, but Susie's group there is going to be trying to get some albizia work done down in Nanavali. So that's maybe coming. But do you know of anybody working in Nanavali currently, Dustin?
No, we used to do a little bit of work down in Nanavali, but that was organized by someone that used to work with BIISC, and she has since moved to the mainland, and so I don't think anyone else has been out treating down there.
Well, if anyone wants to take over and start putting that together, there was a question earlier about, does BIISC come out and help? And we don't for individual properties because we'd be just overwhelmed with requests. But we have helped when people form these little teams, and some of these teams have been, 4 or 6 people. It doesn't have to be a volunteer group, but we will take some time, where we will work directly with that group for a full day and get everybody kind of really strong and really go out there and help. So if you do find like-minded souls within your community who want to do this group, we will come out and help you. And I think the biggest piece of that, and of course, Dustin, you do most of this coordination, you could correct me, but it feels like the biggest piece that folks do is they go out and get the permissions from the absentee ahead of time, right?
That's right, yeah.
So that would be, that's a big part of it. It's not even so much the work we can, if you line up a bunch of commissions, our team can come out, and then with your volunteers and our team in a day, we can actually knock out a lot of trees and often multiple properties. But it's really getting those permissions ahead of time that make the difference for us, because that's just an inordinate amount of work. But, as Dustin pointed out with Judy's work in Ainaloa, I mean, how many properties did she get permission for? It was pretty high up.
Yeah, she got permission for 300 properties, but she sent out, many, many more than that in letters.
So that's 300 properties that, they were able to get the albizia off of before it became hazardous. That's just amazing. So, I mean, there's a lot that, if you have a little bit of time and energy, you can get done. And we're certainly happy to help support you in that. Is there any questions, guys, from the Facebook or the chat? We'll start with Facebook. Kaveh, is there anything going on over there that we need to respond to?
We don't have any questions on the Facebook.
Okay, great. And then Jay, do we have anything in the chat or Q&A that we missed?
I think we touched on everything.
Okay.
Great. Just a lot of
I just
people
want to
saying
direct
thank
people
you.
to the albizia website, or the BIISC.org/albizia. It's got tons of information. It's got all those templates and forms. It's a great resource.
Yeah, it is. We just revised our website. So, you know, it's brand new. So hopefully we've lined everything up in a way that flows really well and you can get the information that you need. But you can always reach out to us at BIISC@hawaii.edu and we are happy to respond. And I think Dustin's email is even in the chat there. So if you have any questions about albizia, or don't forget, as we said in the beginning, Dustin's other big project is rapid ohia death. So if you have any questions about ROD, you can reach out. And I think that if that's all there is, there's a lot of thank yous, Dustin. You should really read over the chat because there's a lot of mahalo going on for you. So
Right.
Thanks
Mahalo
to everyone
for joining.
Thank you to everyone for being here. And thanks for such a great and engaging presentation, Dustin. And that makes 12:30. So aloha to you all and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Aloha.